Welcome to When We're Not Hustling, a podcast where sex workers talk about everything but. I'm your host, Jessie Sage.
Put away the lingerie. I want to know you. Tell me more. I don't care about the news. I want to hear about you and see the world from your point of view. The coffee's already made, so I'll part the shades, just pull up a chair and tell me more.
When We're Not Hustling is a weekly podcast that explores the lives and identities of sex workers outside of our work personas, our personal philosophies, ambitions, families, relationships, passions, spirituality, and so much more. We talk about our lives beyond the job, asking, what does the flexibility of sex work allow us to do, and who does it allow us to be? On this show, we learn who sex workers are outside of the work we're known for. When We're Not Hustling is an exploration of the people behind the fantasies. When We're Not Hustling is brought to you by Assembly 4. Assembly 4 is a collective of sex workers and technologists working to bring the overall cost of sex work down through their advertising platform, Tryst.link. They also educate clients through the Good Client Guide and provide resources and articles written by and for sex workers. Assembly 4 caters to all genders and demographics and raises funds to fight for sex worker rights and against exploitation in the sex industry. Learn more at assembly4.com. ASSEMBLYFOUR.com. Hi, welcome back to another episode of When We're Not Hustling. This is Jessie Sage. I am your friendly host. This is episode number 14, and our guest is Chloe Nova. Before I get into her, I'll give you a few little announcements. One of them is that the producer, Emily, and I have decided that each season is going to be 20 episodes. We're kind of making this up as we go along. We didn't know this when we started, but we decided that we're going to create a 20 episode season. This is number 14. We have a few left until the end of the season, and that episode 20 of each season is going to be a roundtable discussion. And for the first 3 seasons, we've set up themes for the roundtable: body, mind, and spirit. So we are going to have at the end of this season a roundtable on one of those 3 themes, and we'll bring back guests from the season. So we're still working on figuring out exactly what we want to do. And we will decide that after we see how this season has shaped up. But we're looking forward to doing that, and all of that is in the works. The other thing I wanted to say is that Patreon is now up and running. It's under Sapiotextual. It's not under the podcast name because I am putting things that go beyond the podcast into the Patreon. So I'm putting some photo sets. I'm putting my weekly column at the Pittsburgh City Paper, which is called Pillow Talk with Jessie Sage there, and all of these episodes and all of these after parties. So if you want to check that out, it's patreon.com/Sapiotextual. There's also some goodies there like mugs and merch that you get for being at different levels of membership. So check that out. The other thing that I wanted to alert you to, if you haven't been paying attention to this, is on our YouTube channel, which is also Sapiotextual. So youtube.com/Sapiotextual. What we are doing there is putting up a lot of different things, interviews that I've done with folks, this episode or this podcast as well. But also Emily, the producer, and I have been doing something called after parties, where we are debriefing the episodes and kind of talking about the themes of each episode. That's been really fun. And actually, it's been a great experience for me to get to have a more in-depth conversation after some reflection about each episode. We've done something cool. in these episodes, these upcoming episodes, is that we've decided to bring on some other folks to talk about the after party. And we have Milk, Melissa Milk, who was an earlier guest talking about Shibari, who did 3 of the after parties with us. And we are definitely going to have them on to do more. And this morning, I just talked to my mom, who's really interested in coming on and doing them as well. And I know a lot of you really enjoyed hearing from my mom. So Emily and I are excited to bring her on to future after parties too. So if you haven't checked that out, go to youtube.com backslash, I have such a hard time saying that every single time, Sapio Textual. This is, and that's also my Twitter account in case some of you don't know that, is at Sapio Textual with a T. Other than that, I want to get to our episode that we have now. We have Chloe Nova on. Chloe is talking about hitchhiking, and I love this episode because hitchhiking is actually something, A, I've never done, and B, I haven't given much thought to. And when they reached out to me, or when she reached out to me rather, and said that she's been hitchhiking around the world, I wanted to hear these stories. And she has a lot of great stories, but beyond the great stories of the people that she met and the adventures that she had, one of the main things that she talks about here is the act of radical trust and of moving into the world and not doing so, not making decisions based on worst case scenarios, but rather deciding to trust people and mostly trust herself to be able to manage these sorts of like adventures and experiences that she had. So it's definitely a worthwhile listen. By way of introduction, Chloe Nova is an interdisciplinary artist, sex worker, and community organizer. Although currently living in New York City, her vagrant heart dreams of blue highways and the promise of the unknown. You can find her on Twitter at Chloe Nova NYC, and her website is chloenova.net. So let's get right into the interview. Okay, welcome, Chloe. I am very excited to talk to you today.
I'm very excited to be here. I have heard all about you for many years, and so it's actually an honor.
I've heard about you too, because you live with my friend.
We have many, many conversations. She's like, "Oh, did you hear about this one and this one?" And
that's cute.
Yeah.
Yeah, the world is small. Are you going to the book launch for the Holy Hour?
When is it?
I just found out yesterday that it is on April 29th. That's like a Tuesday. There's going to be a book.
I should be here. I'm in the book too.
That's cool that you're in the book. What did you do in the book?
I did a painting.
Oh, nice. So you do painting too. Tell me about your artistic pursuits before we get into the meat of the interview.
Yeah. They're both kind of related. I've been an artist. I've been painting for at least 20 years now. That was my first love. That was my first passion. That was what I went to school for.
Oh, really? For art?
Yeah.
For visual art?
For visual art, for fine art, painting focused.
Nice.
And there was a certain point, and now I've gotten back to it ever since the pandemic. And so now I'm starting a sex worker portrait series.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's like funded by our clients.
Wow.
The subject of the paintings, the sex workers get the finished piece. The clients get a print. The clients pay for it. We both get paid.
That's amazing.
So it's also kind of my attempt at giving circle in a way.
Yeah.
Sex worker giving circle kind of thing.
I love those sorts of things where everybody's getting paid. And I feel like clients in a lot of ways contribute to so many artistic sex work projects that aren't sex work themselves. And I'm always grateful for the kind of patronage that happens too.
Absolutely. I think there's an important relationship there. And I also am really interested to sometimes use clients as mediums for my work, or also I, in many ways, left art because I financially couldn't hack it. Like I couldn't, the struggle was so hard. And I also wanted my relationship to art to be filled with joy. And I didn't want it to be a struggle, and I didn't want it to be my hustle.
So how has that been for you? Do you feel like now that you have different ways of making income that you can go back to art with joy?
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's what this work has given me is time. It's time and like an alleviation of a mental load,
Mm-hmm.
and also a lot of inspiration. Like,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
kink is like intellectually and philosophically really inspiring. So,
Yeah. I was assigned to write an article. I'm not a visual artist, but I'm a writer on shibari. I'd never done it before. And so when I was
yeah.
interviewing people for it, the love that they had for it, I was like, okay, I need to experience this now. And so I did a suspension, or I was suspended, and we did like a photo series from it. And I was like, that was so cool. So like those experiences can be totally artistically inspiring too.
Yeah. And I think I find as I get older these days too, like no matter what field I go into, I need a level of like creative flexibility. For me, creativity is also this feeling of aliveness,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
like what Esther Perel calls the erotic.
Yeah. I love her
You
work.
know, oh, I love her. As my roommate says, she's like, "Ah, my next wife."
I can see that. I see that pairing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think she's great. But yeah, I mean, the erotic and the creative are so tightly connected, and the artistic. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because I've been thinking about all of this stuff too more recently, especially as you've like, I don't know if you want me to go into the prompt.
Well, yeah, I was just waiting to see if you wanted to say something more about that, but like I didn't even know I was going to talk to you about art, but because I reached out to you to talk to you about hitchhiking, because you told me you've hitchhiked around the world, and if those things are related, I want to hear about hitchhiking, because that I know absolutely nothing about, and it's amazing to me that you did that. So you can definitely go into that. So tell me a little bit about that.
Man, it's all related, really.
Yeah.
Um, I am an incredibly highly sensation seeking person.
Mm-hmm.
I score really high on like basically like I think I took some tests
Okay.
and
Uh-huh.
and there was like three different quadrants, but one was like sensation seeking,
Mm-hmm.
which is like often like emotional sensation seeking. You can
Yeah.
also think of this as like experiences,
Yeah,
which
right.
relate to travel. There's like experiential seeking, which is something that's more like adrenaline related, and then there's like
Mm-hmm.
boredom,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
like capacity for boredom, which I interestingly enough score really low on. Because of this, I have always kind of sought out discomfort, and I have like a
Mm-hmm.
really high threshold for discomfort.
Yeah, that's really
And
interesting. So what kinds of discomforts? All kinds of discomforts?
I've always hated being uncomfortable, and I've always
Mm-hmm.
kind of wanted to like push my boundaries a bit with
Yeah.
that, and
Mm-hmm.
like see if I could kind of get through this next thing. And part of that too was like social interactions.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
was like, I had selective mutism as a child. I
Oh,
didn't
did
talk to
you?
adults. Yeah, I didn't
Mm-hmm.
talk to
Mm-hmm.
adults until I was like 15. It was crazy. I went through a traumatic accident right after college, right after graduating from art school, and puddled around, got healed. And I remember my friends came back from traveling on a bus through South America, and I had always wanted to travel,
Mm-hmm.
and their story really inspired me, and their misadventures really inspired me.
Uh-huh.
Um, and and so I was like, fuck it.
Mm-hmm.
I left everything. I quit my job that I could barely hold down. I sold my apartment. I put all my shit into like my parents' basement, and I
Mm-hmm.
traveled for like 5 years.
Oh my gosh, where did you go?
It's been like 40 countries now.
Oh my gosh.
I have hitchhiked in almost all of them. I and part of this was being broke and being
Yeah.
like, you know what? I have like 5 grand to my name. I'm gonna
Mhm.
live off of this for a year or two. And and I
Off of
think
5 grand?
yeah, off of 5 grand. Um, and I had hitchhiked before when I was in Colorado when I was younger, so I kind of got a taste for it. And my first taste of hitchhiking was across the US. I
Okay.
went from the East Coast to the West Coast. Um,
Hitchhiking?
hitchhiking in 2 weeks. So I kind of took my time. I got one ride. So it was like my first or second hitch. I got stranded in Scranton overnight.
Oh my gosh.
That was exciting at a truck stop.
Okay. Well, can you tell me about the first time you hitchhiked? Do you remember?
The very first time I hitchhiked was in Colorado, and that was with my friends, and we would just ride from wherever we were. It was like Rifle or something like that into Glenwood Springs
Mm-hmm.
and back, and that's just kind of how you traveled because the buses sucked.
Okay.
So then I was like, oh, this is how you do it. Like, so I
Yeah.
got kind of the methodology of it.
So when I was younger and I was growing up in California, I remember seeing hitchhikers like on the side of the road with like their thumbs up and you would pick them up or not pick them up. But I don't think I've seen that in like 20 years. And I don't know if it's because I'm in a different part of the world now and I live in Pennsylvania or it doesn't happen as much. Like, is that how you hitchhiked?
Well, so you are also right. And part of this is like the FBI campaign on trying to like stamp out hitchhiking, partially because like there were a string of serial killers and stuff that
Mhm.
did pick up hitchhikers.
Okay. Because I
This-
remember hitchhiking all the time and then it just kind of disappeared.
it did. And part of it was systematic.
Hmm.
And part of it, I think, was just the cultural change. So on the East Coast, it's almost non existent. It's really hard to
Hmm.
hitchhike. And as you get out to the West Coast or like really rural areas out there, there's still a culture of it. But
Interesting.
like,
Hmm.
so I'll tell you the moment in the US specifically, which like really kind of put me in a place where I knew what I was doing was
Hmm.
something I wanted to continue doing. So I get to Columbus, Ohio. It's the first big city I hitched from. Um, One of my least favorite places in the country. No offense to Columbus, but I call it the Pancake City, so it's just not my place.
Why do you not like
Um,
it?
I found it. I looked at an art school there, and I just found it like visually not stimulating and way too
Yeah.
similar to like my hometown where I was trying to escape from.
Okay.
But so I approach a gas station and I walk up to this woman and immediately I feel her unease. And granted, I am like wearing very normal clothes. I'm wearing
Mhm.
color. I'm like trying to smile. I'm doing like the. So I start talking about my trip across the country and like
Mhm.
where I'm going. I'm trying to like, go back to my girlfriend and see her and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to San Francisco, you know? Um, and so with that, she changes her mind. She's like, get in.
Mhm.
She takes me to the bus station because I'm going to a bus station because I'm like, I think at that point I had been stranded for 24 hours and I'm like, I need rest.
Mhm. Mhm.
We talked for over an hour. She like sat in front of the Greyhound station with me. Her name was Patricia.
Oh, really?
And she talked about her college sweetheart who lured her to the southern beaches of California,
Oh.
favorite place in the world, which was Sedona, Arizona. And she's like, promise me you'll visit.
Oh.
So she just pours her heart out to me. And
Mhm.
after I get out of the car, she's like, wait, wait, wait. She fingers through a notepad, fills with papers, and she gives me two gift cards, a Giant Eagle gift card with $100 and something else, and maybe a Visa gift card. And she's like, no, no, no. She wasn't done. She's like, she opens up her wallet, gives me everything in her wallet, which I think was like $67 at the time.
Oh
She's
my
like, I wish I
gosh.
had more to give. I've got window cleaner in the back. I mean, in many ways, at that moment, she became my like raison d'etre. This kind of gave me the momentum because I had seen how I was able to approach someone who immediately like
Mhm.
saw me with suspicion, which is not something that like a young white woman who is dressed in like like backpacking gear
Yeah. Mhm.
normally gets.
Mhm.
And so like really turned heavy on the fawning energy. And I think the next ride I got was a trucker who had offered to bring me all the way across the country for 3 days.
Oh my gosh.
And I didn't take it because I wanted the adventure. I wanted to like couch surf and meet people. And
Mhm.
I think when I was coming back, because I stayed in San Francisco, I came back a month later. I remember this one ride I got, which was this. I go up to, so I am mostly hitchhike with truckers in the US specifically,
Okay.
because regular people are very, very hesitant to pick you up,
Yeah.
even if you go up to them. And truckers will, if they can, pick you up,
Mhm.
especially if they own their own truck. So I learned a lot about trucking. So I go up to this trucker at this truck stop.
Incidentally, I've also learned about trucking in this job that I
I wonder how.
Hmm. Something
I
I
go up
didn't
to
know
this,
that I would ever know about. I've learned
I
about all kinds
know.
of weird professions, trucking being one of them.
I go up to this trucker and he's like, yeah, I'll give you a ride, but you gotta ask my girlfriend. And I was like, I give that to be like, okay, no. He's like, no. She's the big lady coming out of the store. That's his word. Um, and there's this woman coming out of the Love's truck stop, I think.
Uh-huh.
And she's like, yeah, come with me. And as I'm getting into the truck, so I'm kind of like in the back in the cabin,
Mhm.
as I'm getting into a truck, she's like, but I want you to know, I just want you to know, we live a 24/7 master slave lifestyle.
Oh my gosh.
And I was
Who's the
filled
master?
with
Her?
joy. He was the master. It was
Oh, but
so
he had to
fucking
ask her, but you had to
cute.
ask her.
Right? No, it was very, very casual, very low key. She would ask him like random things like, Master, can I please roll down the window? And then it would like fall out of character and it would fall in character.
That's so
And
funny.
I was like, I need to keep doing this. I realized as I'm telling you this that I'm like, I need to write a book about
Mhm.
there's a book in everyone.
Yeah, yeah.
I
Mhm.
think no one's story is like more novel or important than other people. But for me, at least, I live with someone who's writing a book, so I know how painful it is. But for me, I'm like, I need to write more of this down.
Yeah.
But I had hitchhiked through Turkey. My favorite places to hitchhike, in some ways, are counterintuitive. One is Turkey,
Okay.
and the other one is Malaysian Borneo.
Okay.
And both of them, in some ways, because there's not a culture of hitchhiking there either.
Mhm.
And both of them are, well, in Turkey, I didn't necessarily look as much like a foreigner,
Mhm.
or at least depends on like the way I was dressing, because
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
like people who are redheaded and really light who live up
Mhm.
in the north. So, but in Turkey, we hitchhiked through a third of the country. We started because we had this like hitchhiking project.
Okay.
These people that I like met and kind of like joined their hitchhiking project,
Mhm.
to raise money for Syrian refugees in Istanbul.
Oh,
This
wow.
was 2014 or
Okay.
2013, one of the two.
Okay. Mhm.
Um, Hitchhiking in Turkey was so easy. I traveled with my friend Ezra, who has family in Antalya in the south,
Mhm.
um, on the Mediterranean, and which was very helpful because my Turkish was like 30 words,
Yeah.
and she could definitely converse. And
Yeah.
oftentimes with the male truckers or the male drivers, they would first solicit us for sex.
Mhm.
Um, and we would be like, no. Like, we have to insist because they're like, but why not? I want to have sex with you. And I'm like, no. And then after that, they'd be like, okay, come home and meet my family. And I'm like, all right, okay.
Those are the
Well,
options. You can
this
either
is
hang out
interesting.
with my family or you can have sex with me. So
You know what? The like cognitive dissonance is wild, but I appreciate it. And also, it's like in very almost never in the US, but and very rarely, honestly, in most places except certain countries, do I ever really get solicited for sex, or did I ever really felt in danger?
Mhm.
Um, Part of that is like chance. Part of that is like
Yeah.
maybe my own assessment of risk.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I know that like at one point we were in Lake Burdur in the middle of Turkey, and we were kind of like stranded. And I think we get dropped off near a quarry on a mountainy part, and this old man, eventually, after like an hour, this
Mm-hmm.
old man in a tractor stopped. So we hitched a ride with him in the tractor, and we went back to his place. We went back to his family.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they like made us food. I think he hitched us another ride with a group of men who we met the mayor of the town,
Oh,
and then
wow.
he like drove us from village to village, like meeting people, because these are areas of Turkey too where like very few foreigners visit.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, for me, it was, what kind of life are you going to live if you live your life through worst case scenarios?
Right, right. Mm-hmm.
Part of this whole thing for me was like, really philosophical, like
Mm.
in some ways like an act of resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
an act of resistance specifically against like the threat of violence that women face, that like non-normative bodies face, that
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
um
For you, was that like active resistance? Like, I am not going to live under fear of that. I'm just going to live my life, or what did that feel like for you?
that has very much always kind of been my like my way of being, my modus
Mm-hmm.
operandi. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
have a really high fear threshold. I'm like
Yeah.
not I don't get spooked really easily.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um and thus I also will like put myself into situations
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of other people will not, for good reason.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
you spend your whole life getting instructions on how not to get murdered, and
Right.
like we have to navigate public space and in like interpret our environment differently
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
depending on how we're perceived by different people.
Right.
And with cis men are more likely to die violently or be murdered
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
than cis women, and they're not taught to be victims. And so part of
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
too is like a resistance to having my body policed in space.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this idea that you're bringing up is like trust as a revolutionary act. Thank you for listening to When We're Not Hustling. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Doing so will help other people find us. And if you're a sex worker who wants to come on the show and talk about your life outside of work, we would love to have you. Please send an email with more information to nothustlingpod@proton.me, or as an act of resistance.
Absolutely. And like this, I was listening to a podcast about veneer theory recently, and like it's like a theory of human nature in which
Like everyone is bad or out for their own good, or
let me read you what he says actually. Um, he wrote it in a Leviathan. He's like,
oh,
it's kind of
Hobbes.
a
Yeah.
Hobbes, like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Hobbesian idea. So
Right.
it's like this view that there was like a contract among our ancestors,
Mm-hmm.
decided to live together, quote, by like covenant only, which
Right.
is
Mm-hmm.
artificial. So there is a veneer underneath the veneer. We
Yeah.
are animalistic. We are
Right.
like,
Solitary, nasty, brutish, and life is solitary, nasty, brutish, and short. Yeah.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, and in many ways, I think a lot of people either fall into one category or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes into this idea of like a fall from grace too, which also you can imagine that like sex workers are very much thrown into the mix of
Right.
that,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
the polluted body of the whore.
Right.
um,
Right.
and then our ideas about human nature also like dictate biopolitics.
Right. Mm-hmm.
They have like direct implications on our lives. This is an example of like, I couldn't do this. I couldn't hitchhike. I couldn't meet these people. In many
Yeah.
ways, I couldn't be doing the work that I'm doing if I believed that
Right.
without the structure in place, and I would argue like it's violence, because the state structure in many ways is like a monopoly on violence.
Yeah. So wait, let me go back for a second. So
My ADHD brain is just like going all over the place.
I'm following here, but what I'm trying to understand is so if you I had not heard the word veneer theory used for like Hobbesian philosophy before, but like the idea that Hobbes has is that we, outside of the social contract is what he talks about, we are all, we would live lives in this animalistic way, like you talk about, and we're all out for ourselves, and we would naturally be selfish. But we realize that it's better for us to work together and collaboratively and kind of trust each other. So we do that, but we do it not because we want to. We do it because it's in our own interest to do that. So we decide to do that together. So I think like I'm trying to get a sense of whether you feel like that's true or whether you think that he's wrong about that and there is reason to actually trust people. I'm trying to connect your idea of trust here to that.
It's actually a Franz de Waal term.
Do you feel like that's right? Do you think that we are all naturally selfish, or do you think and that we need these social contracts? Or because as I was listening to you, what I was thinking is that like in order to do that, and I feel like this about sex work too, I think there has to be a part of you that also believes in like the goodness of people. Like you've had these experiences where people have been very generous to you for
Yeah.
no reason other than that they wanted to.
Yeah, I think I push back very hard on this idea that without this social contract,
Yeah. Hmm.
um, we are narcissistic. We are only
Right.
in it for ourselves.
Right.
Biologically, that's very against the type of human nature that sees us as social creatures.
Right. Right.
Um, and
Or that are born into interdependence. Like we are born into
actually,
interdependence. Yeah.
yeah, we live in a society now that really fosters independence, that
Mm-hmm.
fosters, kind of like what Byung Chul Han, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, what he talks about with like the narcissism of
Mm-hmm.
everyday life, that we are so self-focused that we forget about the encounter with the other. With hitchhiking, you have no idea
Mm-hmm.
who this person is, and they
Yeah.
have no idea who you are. So in many ways, we are out of bounds of like a
Yeah.
normal social
Mm-hmm.
contract.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've been thinking about the writings of Rebecca Solnit recently a lot, because mine and her lives have like a type of through line, because she
Mm-hmm.
has lived in San Francisco. She's also lived in New Orleans, and I have lived in San Francisco, and
Mm-hmm.
I've also lived in New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
And um, she really speaks to me when she talks about human compassion and how do we respond to each other when the
Mm-hmm.
world falls apart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I have to believe that there's an element of humanity in which people are innately altruistic, and the
Yeah.
most
Mm-hmm.
likely option is that like people will show up
Yeah.
for other people. I
Yeah.
think she said something like compassion is the new currency.
Yeah, what I'm thinking about, I love this idea that you talked about of like the hitchhiking experiences being like outside of the social construct. I often think about sex work like that too, because I mean, they are relationships outside of any social respectability, right? And so you enter into something in which like you're not supposed to be there. I'm not supposed to do that. And I think there's something that can be like very honest that cuts through a lot of social expectations that happens like in sex work sessions. And I was wondering if you think that there's a similar thing that happens in like the hitchhiker experience too.
Yeah, that cuts through social expectations.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think people will often fall in between the two extremes that you'll expect of them. You
Yeah.
know, I had gotten a ride, especially if you get a really long ride with someone, they'll tell you their life history. You're doing a lot of like, in the true sense of the term, emotional labor.
Right. Yeah.
Someone said currency or talk is the currency of the hitchhiker or something like that. I'm misquoting.
Interesting. Yeah.
They're often picking you up because they're sharing a moment of vulnerability. They're sharing you your life story.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a ride from a man who used to work for cartel in
Oh,
Mexico, a trucker,
interesting. Yeah.
years ago. And I think he had friends, family who was killed. And he had talked to me about like people. He's like, I've done some shit. I've killed some people, blah, blah, blah. But he's like,
Yeah.
when they started going after people's families, he was like, fuck that. I'm out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to hear the threads of people's lives and to see
Mm-hmm.
that we're messy and complicated creatures, and
Mm-hmm.
that goodness and badness are not qualities of people,
Mm-hmm.
but in many ways actions
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
that don't necessarily define like somebody's place in the world,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and that these things are contextual, are really important. And it also, I've also had moments in which I've made bad judgments where
Mm-hmm.
we were like basically kidnapped. in,
You say with a
in
smile.
you know what? Just I'm here. um it was a lesson. We knew immediately by the way that this person pulled over and by the fact that he wanted me in the front seat. And he spoke very fast Spanish, and we did not really speak Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really interesting communicating with him. But we wanted to get off before where he was going. He was going to Malaga.
Mm-hmm.
And he was basically like, no, you, me, Malaga in Spanish. And my first instinct was rage.
Yeah.
So that's interesting because it tells you
Mm-hmm.
something about me. And I was like, what do I do? But this moment, like I'm really appreciative for the fact that my first reaction was not fear, because it gave me a level of clarity in which I was able to kind of reason
Yeah.
and be
Mm-hmm.
like, should I threaten him? Should I threaten to call the police? My friend's in the back laughing at me as I'm doing this. Gives you an air to the mood of this encounter. And so at first I'm like angry, and that didn't work. And after a few rest stops, I changed my tune. I put on my American smile, and I'm like, please, can you drop us off here? In the Spanish that I remembered at the time. And he looked at me, he frowned, and he pulled in, dropped us off roughly. I'm kind of like half in, half out of the front seat because she's
Mm-hmm.
getting our bags out of the back. And he pulls away, pissed off. And at the end of that, we're like, all right, we were desperate, but we don't need to be that desperate again.
Yeah.
And
there are like levels to it's interesting that you say that though, because I feel like some of the bad choices that I've made, I don't know, like I was talking to my therapist the other day and she's like, well, now you know why you don't do that. And I was like, yeah, I guess I just learned
yes,
something from that. Um, what do you think that, I mean, you've talked about a lot of different things, but what do you feel like you've gained from your experiences hitchhiking?
this is where the book comes in,
Mm-hmm.
because there's something to be said. I definitely have learned my ease of hitchhiking in many ways can be contrasted by other friends who have not had this ease because they
Mm-hmm.
didn't have the right passport. They
Yeah.
weren't the right color. Ironically, men often have an easier time hitchhiking solo than women, depending on where you are, because they look at us and they think we're a whore, or
Mm-hmm.
B, which they might be right because there's a culture of
Yeah.
hitchhiking and sex work, which people do it because that's how they make money, and that's great.
Yeah.
But they immediately cast us as a certain polluted body, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's
and
interesting that would preclude you from hitchhiking.
yeah,
I mean, I say in horror, I'm like, wait,
right.
what?
I
Why
did the
can't
one before the other, which is interesting. And it taught me a lot about my relationship to other people in the world. It taught me how to basically provided me the architecture in which to interact with people, which helped me
Yeah.
when I started stripping.
Hmm.
I had to learn human behavior and also
Yeah.
like hyper empathize with people, because you're doing a lot of labor as you're hitchhiking, a lot of
Yeah.
like
Hmm.
emotional labor,
Yeah.
because you are the one who are like, I'm often asking them questions, I'm trying to make them comfortable.
Yeah.
It gave me a tool set to talk to a lot of different people who are absolutely nothing like me,
Yeah.
which I think
That's one of
is
the things that I love about sex work is like these encounters
right.
with people that you wouldn't ever stop and talk to otherwise.
And on the internet, often we're not provided that
No,
opportunity
because we're
because
siloed into people just like us. Yeah.
yeah. And in some ways, like, it gave me a taste of what freedom is. And I think
Mm.
freedom outside of this idea of like the white male explorer, like
Yeah.
conquering the world. I very much like came into other people's homes and other people's countries, um, really trying to see myself as a guest,
Hmm. Hmm.
and misstepping all the way because I was
Yeah.
young, and I'm always learning, and if I do things again, I will often not do it in the same way that I did before, but like,
Right.
um I think, in the words of David Graeber, like, we trying to act in which we are already free,
Hmm.
and slipping through the margins of society,
Yeah.
being able to, it gave me an ability to navigate outside of the bounds of what is acceptable and
Yeah.
outside of the
Hmm.
bounds of what is constructed for me.
Yeah.
You're literally physically outside of these bounds. You are on the highway, you are in the
Yeah.
middle of the
Hmm.
Saharan desert. You are like, yeah, that was fun. We were only stranded for like 5 hours, but that was sketchy. And it provided me also a template, or maybe a comfort at like really knowing myself, and knowing how to navigate these interactions with people
How to
when I
move
was
through
doing
the world, huh?
how to move through the world.
Yeah.
I These are like the lessons also that like sex work teaches
Hmm.
you,
Hmm.
and that, being a criminal,
Yeah.
hitchhiking is criminalized. So it's just like, you know but
Yeah.
often what is criminalized is our people, and our things in which do not suit a specific status quo that
Right.
enriches a select group of people.
Right. I think that's a good note to end on. I like to end all of the episodes with three things. So what are you reading right now?
Too many things, but so I'm getting back into two books which I had started to read and left and then come back to. I'm reading On Freedom
Okay.
by Maggie Nelson. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the book
I
in
love
many ways,
Maggie Nelson.
I love her too, and she really informs many things.
Yeah.
My art, like what I'm saying now in the podcast,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm also reading Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments
Who wrote
again,
that?
Saidiya Hartman,
Okay.
um, and it's like a history of turn of the century Black women in Philadelphia and New York.
Nice.
It's about their intimate lives, sex workers, working women, queer women,
Mm-hmm.
and it's talking about different forms of kinship, different
Mm-hmm.
forms of intimacy, living outside of the bounds of law. And
Yeah.
like, they remind you that like the other people have also paved a road
Yeah.
that was similar to yours,
Yeah.
you know?
So what are you listening to?
What am I listening to? Oh, music wise or podcast wise?
Whatever, however you want to answer.
I'm listening to another audiobook because I'm big in audiobooks, especially when I paint,
Mm-hmm.
called Mothers and Others.
Oh, I think I've read that.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to, I forget the author. It's like part anthropology, part history,
Mm-hmm.
stories about the evolution of caretaking
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
how it's very different in other simians and also
Mm-hmm.
very different, like
Across culture. Yeah.
it's, yeah, very different across culture and also very different from how we think of it as like
Mm-hmm.
that in many cultures it's like a lineage of mothers, like aunts, grandmothers, friends who caretake children as opposed to just a nuclear family.
Right, right. And what are you excited about?
Ooh, well, New Orleans right
Yeah.
now. Mardi Gras is Tuesday. I'm very excited. New Orleans is a special place in my heart. It's my first Mardi Gras since 2020.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited for to wander around and see what happens because that's very much what you do in New Orleans, and that is what you do well.
Yeah.
And I think I'm thinking of this note from Saidiya Hartman, and this is also a note in relation to New Orleans and through what New Orleans went through and Louisiana went through with
Mm-hmm.
Katrina, is that like she says, care is the antidote to violence.
Mm-hmm.
That the people of New Orleans took care of each other after
Yeah.
Katrina.
Mm-hmm.
We saw this during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
I mean, this is also a through thread through everything that you've said too, though, is like it's the like trust and like care that allows you to like not fear the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. And where can people find you?
They can find me on Instagram and Twitter, both
Mm-hmm.
with the same handle, Chloe Nova
Mm-hmm.
NYC.
Nice.
I have a website, it links through there. I have an art site as well.
What's your art site?
Well, my art site, actually, my Instagram links to my art site. And so I
Nice.
recently changed it. And it is Mother Skin, just to make you feel unsettled, mother.skin.
That's nice.
I think the O is a 0 on Instagram.
In mother. Okay. Okay. Nice. Okay. Well, it was really great to hear about your adventures. Thank you so much for sharing
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was really interesting and I really appreciated it. Thank you for joining us for another episode of When We're Not Hustling. I'm your host, Jessie Sage. You can find me on Twitter at sapiotextual or visit my website at jessiesage.com. The show was produced by Emily Foster. The music is by Benjamin J. Benamati. Our intern is Anna Fisher. You can follow us on socials on Instagram and Twitter at Not Hustling Pod. Signing off. Have a great week.